In the world of American politics, where satire often becomes more cutting than actual debate, and where late-night television hosts sometimes end up being sharper fact-checkers in the official press briefings, the battle between Donald Trump and Stephen Colbert has become one of those cultural clashes that define an era. And on Friday, when Trump took to his social media account to post that he absolutely loved that Colbert got fired because, in his view, Colbert's talent was even less than high S ratings. It was more than just a throwaway line from a former president still obsessed with late-night comedians. It was the beginning of another chapter in this ongoing saga between a man whose fragile ego constantly craves validation and another man whose career is built on making audiences laugh at the absurdity of power. But here's the thing. Would an untalented man, as Trump claims, really be able to craft satire so sharp, so culturally relevant, and so widely embraced that it can rattle the nerves of a former commander-in-chief? That's where the irony begins. Because the very fact that Trump can't stop himself from rage posting about Colbert is proof enough that Colbert has gotten under his skin in ways that policy critics, journalists, and even political opponents haven't managed to achieve. And if Trump thought dismissing him as talentless would end the story, he badly miscalculated, because in the game of ridicule and wit, Colbert has a home advantage. And before we go further into this roller coaster of mockery, satire, and political absurdity, let me pause for just a moment to say this. You're watching Exposed Nation. And if you enjoy seeing us break down the clashes between powerful figures and the comedians, critics, and truth-tellers who call them out, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because each week we dive deep into the stories that others skim past, exposing the hypocrisy, the drama, and yes, the comedy in America's political circus. Subscribing doesn't just help us keep creating these stories. It makes you part of a community that refuses to look away when the powerful try to control the narrative. So go ahead, click subscribe, and let's keep going with today's saga. The beauty of satire is that it doesn't just poke fun, it exposes, it reveals. It slices through layers of hypocrisy like a scalpel disguised as a joke. And when Trump, sitting in his golden palace of self-importance, tried to reignite his feud with Colbert, he clearly underestimated the man on the other side of the screen. On that particular night, like countless others, Colbert came out on stage in his well-tailored suit, delivering his monologue to an audience that knew exactly what they were in for. Biting commentary, sharp comedic timing, and a fearless willingness to say out loud what millions were thinking quietly at home. And somewhere else, likely in the darkness of Mar-a-Lago, Trump sat with his phone, typing furiously, trying to counterpunch with insults that read less like presidential commentary and more like the ramblings of someone unprepared for the war of words he himself had provoked. Because if satire is a battlefield, then Colbert's arsenal is wit, intelligence, and cultural relevance, while Trump's bluster, denial, and endless grievances about being treated unfairly. It was in that contrast that the story unfolded. Colbert, unfazed, sharpened his monologue until it cut through the noise like a razor, smirking with that confidence that only comes from a man who knows is holding the MIC and the truth at the same time. For nearly 10 minutes, he unleashed scorched earth comedy. No cue cards, no hesitation, just pure, unfiltered ridicule aimed directly at Trump's contradictions, lies, and ego. Every line dripped with sarcasm. Every pause invited laughter and recognition. Every punchline landed with the weight of truth wrapped in humor. And somewhere in Florida, Trump's hairspray-coated hair must have curled in frustration as a late-night stage turned into a courtroom of comedy where he was a defendant and Colbert the relentless prosecutor. Because make no mistake, when Colbert roasted Trump, it isn't just about laughs. It's about holding a mirror up to power and showing it how ridiculous it looks when stripped of spin and self-promotion. Trump's world thrives on control, image, and the constant repetition of his own version of reality. But comedy disrupts that. Comedy breaks through the noise by making people laugh at the very things Trump wants them to fear or respect. That's why Trump has always had such a thin skin when it comes to comedians. Whether it was Alec Baldwin impersonating him on Saturday Night Live or Colbert mocking his latest outburst on television, because Trump understands perhaps better than most that ridicule is a weapon that can't be countered with executive orders or Twitter rants. He can fire officials, silence critics with lawsuits, or intimidate political opponents. But he can't stop a joke from spreading. He can't control laughter. And that's why he hates Colbert, because every time he tries to lash out, Colbert turns it into more fuel for comedy, more reason for audiences to laugh, and more damage to Trump's carefully constructed image as a strong, untouchable leader. On that night, Colbert went beyond simple jokes. He turned Trump's own behavior into satire so sharp that it made the absurdity impossible to ignore. When Trump announced military strikes as casually as someone might post about their lunch, Colbert painted the picture of a reckless leader driving the world into chaos like an Uber driver lost in a rage spiral, while the passengers, meaning all of us, sat helplessly in the backseat. When Trump tried to brag about settlement deals, Colbert framed it as a mock betrayal, as though his own network had handed money to a man whose greatest intellectual achievement was yelling fake news louder than the microwave could beep. And when Trump's physical appearance began to falter under the stress, his skin peeling, his energy fading, Colbert didn't shy away. He highlighted it with the same comedic sharpness that made people laugh, but also made them question, is this really the man who was entrusted with running the most powerful country on earth? The story continued with example after example of Trump stumbling into his own traps. His obsession with crowd sizes became a running gag because Colbert, like so many others, knew the difference between reality and fantasy, and the pictures never lied. Trump could insist that 250,000 people had gathered, but the camera shots revealed a fraction of that number, and Colbert knew exactly how to amplify that absurdity for maximum comedic effect. His metaphors cut deeper than statistics ever could, comparing Trump's self-image to a parody of a president who wandered out of a writer's room by mistake and somehow ended up in the White House. The audience laughed, but beneath the laughter was a recognition that comedy was speaking a truth politics often failed to address. And that's the genius of Colbert's approach. He doesn't just mock Trump for the sake of mockery. He connects each outburst, each meltdown, each ridiculous statement to a larger truth about power, democracy, and accountability. Trump wanted to ban TikTok. Colbert framed it as the irony of a man trying to silence teenagers dancing online while he himself stumbled daily on a national stage. Trump wanted to buy Greenland. Colbert turned it into the image of a man mistaking a frozen wasteland for a golf course. Each joke wasn't just funny. It was a commentary on the recklessness, the lack of seriousness, the inability to govern. And the more Trump fought back, the more material Colbert had to work with, turning every attack into ammunition, every insult into a setup for the next punchline. This battle wasn't just between two men. It represented something larger. On one side was Trump, the embodiment of power unchecked, fueled by ego and desperate for constant validation. On the other was Colbert, representing the voice of satire, the ability of comedy to hold power accountable in a way that politics sometimes fails to do. And the clash between them wasn't just entertainment. It was cultural commentary, a reminder that laughter can be more powerful than fear, that ridicule can topple the image of strength, and that truth often slips through the cracks in the form of a well-timed punchline. Trump could rage all he wanted about very unfair comedians, but every time he did, he gave Colbert more material, more relevance, more laughter to share with the world. And so the story continues, each side playing its role, each night adding another chapter. Trump tries to reclaim dignity with press releases that sound like ransom notes, while Colbert counters with 5-minute monologue sharper than any policy speech. Trump insists on his victories, even when reality says otherwise, while Colbert calmly dismantles the contradictions with wit, sarcasm, and a smirk that tells you he already knows how the story ends. Because in this war of words, there's no doubt who holds the advantage. Trump may have had the power of the presidency, but Colbert has the power of comedy. And in a world where laughter spreads faster than propaganda, that's a weapon Trump has never been able to neutralize.